Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Convention of States, Indiana Live. Let me ask you a question. Do you think we still have a big problem with our federal government in Washington, D.C.? Well, if you do, stay tuned because we at Convention of States have a solution as big as the problem. Well, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I had to clear my throat there at the very last minute. But once again, I want to welcome you to our broadcast this evening. Just to give you a little, my name's Dale Parrish, by the way. I'm the state director for Convention of States here in Indiana. And let me give you a little overview of our broadcast. We're basically in 3 segments. Our first segment is going to be a discussion period. And this evening, we have one of our district captains, Larry Wee. And Larry has a couple amendment ideas that he would like to see considered at the convention. So this is going to be very interesting. And we could have more broadcasts in this area as far as amendment ideas, because a lot of people do have some very, very good ideas. Our second segment, then, I'll go to a PowerPoint presentation that I use. And in the second segment, give you some general information about how Convention of States here in Indiana is doing. And this is actually the second segment and the third segment are both geared toward those individuals new to Convention of States. You may already be a supporter, but if you're not and you're wanting more information, this will be good. The second and third segments will be good information for you. Again, the second segment will be some general information on Convention of States here in Indiana. The third segment will be what we call the basics of Convention of States. And these are the tenets that we practice and that we go by in Convention of States. So hopefully that'll be good information for you. All right, before we get started, I want to issue my standard warning, and that is if your screen would go blank or freeze up, please just understand we probably encountered a technical problem. And I just ask that you not hang on because we won't be coming back on. It just takes too long to get everything up and going again. So if this would occur, just please put us on your calendar for next Monday evening at 7 p.m. and join us at that time. All right. Well, without further ado, then let's get into our first segment, and we'll bring on Larry, and I'll get him coming in from the lobby area. There he is. Hi, Larry.
Hi, Dale. Hello, everyone.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Larry Wee, as I said, Larry is one of our district captains, and District 68. Am I right, Larry?
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Larry has some ideas about a few, 2 or 3 maybe ideas as to some amendments that maybe should be considered at the convention. But Larry, first of all, let's talk. Let me get up here some. Okay, there we go. Yeah, as I said, we're going to be. We've got some amendment ideas. Larry's got 2 or 3 of them here that we're going to be talking about. But first of all, let's talk about. Let's kind of set the stage that what Convention of States has set forth in the application that we want to get every state to sign on to, or at least get 34 states to sign on to in order to hold the convention. And you want to just kind of give an overview of the 3 areas that our application will address.
Well, Sure. It's about term limits. It's about fiscal responsibility and kind of a general provision of anything that kind of limits the power and scope of the federal government.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Fiscal restraints limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and term limits.
Mhm.
And I think, Larry, I think the idea is that you're going to discuss with us this evening certainly fall into at least a couple of these, I would say, areas. So let's get going then, and let's talk about your first idea. And I'll let you get going. It has to do with campaign financing, right?
Absolutely. Um, as you recall, Dale, when I first joined Convention of States, I shared with you that I was a big fan of Convention of States before the Convention of States ever even started. I actually got involved in this work myself back in 2008, and in trying to formulate some of the things that I could see that could really reverse some of the negative directions we were heading, I started looking at re-election rates and barriers to getting better candidates and barriers to getting more frequent turnover of candidates. Because if you look at re-election rates in Congress, depending on which house you look at and depending on which exact slice of time in that you look at, you're looking at re-election rates in the 80 to sometimes almost 90% range. So I started really digging into that because, if you'll pardon my sarcasm, I don't know, with some very notable exceptions, few of us would say our Washington leadership is necessarily populated with the best and brightest the country has to offer. So, so why is that, right? Why aren't we getting more of the best and brightest there? And why do we have this an incredible reelection rate? Well, my data is very old. It's probably 10 years old at this point. But the same continues, and that is the average Senate race, back when I looked at it, was $7.5 million. And for the average challenger to take out an incumbent, the challenger had to spend twice as much. So
this information's back in 2008, Larry?
Back in 2008.
2008.
So the numbers are just bigger now.
Oh,
so
yeah.
In 2008, I'm asking myself, gee, if I want to run for Senate, where would I come up with $15 million?
Right.
And House races, of course, are much lower cost. But right about that time is when we crossed the threshold as a nation, and there were no longer any House race in the country that was less than $1 million. So even if your objective is to become a House member, the same rules apply. You pretty much need to spend twice what the incumbent does. So even there, you've got to come up with $2 million. Well, to come up with that kind of money, unless you're independently wealthy and there aren't that many Donald Trumps around, you've got to fundraise. And if you've got to fundraise, how do you do it? Well, you have to get into the good graces of the party. And the party has their special interests and their big donors. And yeah, you can be successful at it. People are, that's how it happens today. But so much of what we have in place continues to be perpetuated because a new House member or a new senator walks into the chamber the first time with a laundry list of IOUs from their donors. So, and those donors, they have specific pet programs they want to keep going. Certain things that may not make sense to the average citizen, but it serves their particular interest. It's a cycle that's very difficult to break. So I thought, how do you break that? Well, what if campaigns were publicly funded by the taxpayer and nobody could use their own money? Nobody could use any outside money. It would instantly level the playing field. Candidates wouldn't have to spend time raising funds. They would have to compete on their ideas. They'd have to compete on their organizational skill. One of the best things I think that could, as a great test of leadership, is how effective you can be with limited resources. I know that's how I want my politicians to think about my tax money. And so I think with those barriers out of the way, I think we have a much better chance of attracting some of the best and brightest now, because, hey, all I've got to do now is go in and campaign on my ideas, campaign on my organization skill. I don't have to go get hooked up with all these special interests and so forth. Now, I know this is very controversial, because when I floated this idea with some of my conservative brethren, I very quickly got beat about the head with, oh, wait a minute, that's an infringement on my freedom of speech rights.
Yeah, freedom of speech.
Yeah, it's a trade-off. I mean, I recognize that. You try to find good solutions to complex problems. There usually are always some trade-offs, and maybe in a convention, the state body, when if this idea were debated, maybe the wise heads in that room would figure out that, well, maybe it's not such a good idea. But I wanted to share it as a means to kind of think out of the box.
Okay.
And to recognize that term limits alone won't necessarily, as great as term limits would be, it won't necessarily solve some of the issues that we see, because if everybody's term limited, fine, we'll get more turnover, but the party is still going to be the money-making machine. It's going to be tied to the special interest. It's going to be funding the new guy coming in, or the new person coming in.
Right.
So, to me, it would be a great add in addition to term limits.
Okay. All right. Let's go to the next one then. And that is single issue bills. All right. This is a good one.
Single issue bills. Obamacare is probably the greatest example. The 2,000 some odd page bill that nobody read, that was voted on. As most of us know, a lot of pet projects get funded by having provisions buried into a bill that has nothing to do with it. But it's the horse trading that goes on in Congress. Okay, I'll support your bill, but I'm going to insert a paragraph that's going to fund my little pet project over here. And the one that that I always, to me, is always the funny one is, you may recall, who was the former Senate Majority Leader? I'll think of him. Anyway, from Arizona, he had the Cowboy Poet Society.
Oh, him. Reed.
Harry Reid. Thank you.
Harry Reid.
And I never heard of the Cowboy Poet Society until it got discovered in one of these bills. And,
you hadn't heard of that, Larry? You hadn't heard of the Cowboy? What was the Cowboy Poet Society?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think most of the country had not heard of that.
Well, exactly.
Go ahead.
and then, of course, when Harry got called out on it, he was telling us just, what a wonderful event it is and how everybody likes and all that. And you know what? I'm sure all of that is true. But why should the other 49 states be paying for it? If it really has merit, it'll attract its own funding. It'll stand on its own 2 feet. And, so just imagine the thousands of the Cowboy Poet Society kinds of things that are getting buried in these multi-page bills. So, for me, another way to get at the fiscal restraint here is, you can't have a bill more than X pages long, probably 30 pages long. I mean, the original Social Security bill, which was one of the more complex pieces of legislation in its time, I believe, was on 33 pages. So single issue bills and a page limit. If you can't get your idea spelled out in 30 pages, well, then break it into 2. And who knows, maybe our representatives would actually read the bills before they vote on them.
I think the requirement today seems to be thousands of pages. It just seems like that. I don't know, but yeah, you're exact. That's a very good one. Very good one. All right, we got one more idea here, and I really like this one.
I'm sure that all of you have heard of sunset provisions. A lot of times our legislation gets passed, and a lot of times it's tax bills, especially if it's a tax reduction that has a sunset provision on it. One of them was the inheritance tax structure a few years ago. It got reduced substantially, but it had I don't know, a 5 or 10 year sunset provision that if nobody did anything, it was going to go away and it was going to go back to its earlier higher rates. One of the things that I think would be a great idea and for the consideration in a convention would be any federal agency that is not specifically enumerated in the original Constitution, which of course would have all of the cabinet positions and so forth. Okay, those are untouchable. Those were defined by the founders as essential to run the country. But everything since then, and every one of these the fourth branch of government, essentially the bureaucracy.
Right.
If we, for whatever reason, let me use Department of Energy, for example, is probably a great example. I was in high school when the Department of Energy was formed. Jimmy Carter put it in place because the world was running out of oil apparently, and we didn't have any, and the Department of Energy was going to solve our energy problems. Well, 40 plus years later, the Department of Energy is this behemoth of an organization. God knows thousands of employees, and the private sector solved our energy problems. The Department of Energy did not. So it seems to me that new agencies created should have an automatic shelf life of 5 years. And then after 5 years, you've got to come in and show your results against the objective that you were chartered to do. Mm-hmm. And if you're not delivering on those results, well, then there's not a vote on it. You automatically go away. And if you are meeting your results, then the debate centers on, well, is this still a problem? Does this need to continue? Or is it really solved and we can still do away with this agency? As Ronald Reagan said, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government agency. And
so, true.
Yeah, it is true. So this could be one way to get about that. And by definition, then that would shrink the size and scope of the government, and we get the fiscal savings along with it. So those are a few ideas to consider.
Very good, Larry. I hope you have some other ideas, and you'd be willing to come back on at a later broadcast and present some other ideas. Would that be possible? Would that be possible?
Sure.
You sound like a guy that's got a lot of ideas. So, but that's what this is all about. We're talking about wanting to hold a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments, and so this will be a time for ideas like this leading up to the convention. So. Okay, good, Larry. Thank you very much for sharing those with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Hope to have you on again. Thanks a lot, Larry.
Thanks.
All right. Well, let me proceed on to the second segment of our broadcast this evening. Now, I'm going to bring up this PowerPoint, and I want to initiate the option where you will see where the PowerPoint will, let me get up here to the beginning here. The PowerPoint will occupy the full screen and should make it easier for you to see it. So there we are. Okay, let's get going now in segment 2. We have a lot of resources available to us here at Convention of States in Indiana. And the main resource that we utilize is our national website, conventionofstates.com. And you're going to hear us make reference to that website frequently tonight and other times. But it has a wealth of information, and it's also a major tool that we use in administering Convention of States here in Indiana. So, conventionofstates.com. Now, embedded in that website is our state website page, which would be conventionofstates.com/Indiana. That'll be kind of a more focused look on our state. Social media platforms, we're on Facebook. We have a state Facebook page, Convention of States, Indiana. As a matter of fact, this broadcast is being brought to you this evening through that Facebook page. YouTube channel, COS Indiana. Now that channel is very much an educational resource for people to utilize. We have narrated PowerPoint presentations. We have recordings of these broadcasts that we're doing. And then we also have links. We provide links to podcasts. Our legislative liaison, Paul Phillips, who's been pretty much a regular on our broadcasts, does a podcast. It's called the Free to Be Free podcast. And so we have links on that YouTube channel to all of his podcasts, which we also, I might mention, we use as resource material on many of our broadcasts when Paul is on to discuss a particular topic that he's covered in one of his broadcasts, or one of his podcasts, excuse me. Also, social media platforms, we're on Twitter, hashtag COS Indiana, we're on Instagram, Convention of States, Indiana, and we're also now on LinkedIn. So you can find us if you look for us. Won't take very much searching to find us, but we're out there. Give you some numbers here on Convention of States, Indiana. In 2018, we surpassed 30,000 supporters here in Indiana. Been growing tremendously, been experiencing about a 40% growth rate. So we've declared then our goal for 2019 is to hit 40,000 supporters, and we're well on our way to achieve that goal. About 2,900 volunteers, people that have indicated a willingness to help out when called upon. Then we have about 40 people in leadership positions. And for those of you just learning about Convention of States, if you have any inclination, any desire to maybe get more involved in our organization, go to this national website, conventionofstates.com, and click on the menu selection, Take Action. Scroll down and look at the different volunteer positions that we have available. If anyone's of interest to you, open it up, read about it. If you're really interested, go ahead and make an application. Now, you're not obligated in any way here. But what that does is that your name will then come up on a report that I see daily, and as well as a few others. One of us then will be in contact with you to discuss further the one that you've chosen and expressed an interest in. So if you have any, if you want to get involved in our organization, go to the conventionofstates.com and look at those positions. All right, let's now get into the third segment, which is the basics. These are the three tenets of Convention of States that we all go by, and that's the problem, the solution, and the plan. Now, the problem in basically one sentence is that our government's out of control. What we mean by that is our government officials lack the political will and courage to address some very, very basic structural issues that we believe exist. Now, not blaming any one political party, because both parties have contributed to this. And it's not a current thing. This has been building for decades. So it's a matter of lacking will and courage. Now, we further define this problem as three abuses by the federal government. The first one is our national debt. If any of you follow this very closely, you know we're over $22 trillion in debt as a country. We have unfunded liabilities of some numbers I've seen over $250 trillion. And as you know, very little is being done to address this national debt issue. So that's one of the abuses that we believe needs to be addressed. The second abuse is what we call a regulatory crisis. As you know, the administrative state in our government has become known as the fourth branch of government. I know the current administration has been eliminating some regulations, but much more needs to be done in this area, and much needs to be done in controlling the process by which these regulations are created. So the administrative state, the regulatory crisis, that's the second abuse. Third abuse has to do with state sovereignty. When a country was founded, it was founded on a concept known as dual federalism, where the federal government and the states would share in power. Well, that has all tilted toward the federal government. I mean, money is involved, certainly power, and we believe the career politician has played a big role in this. So that's where we think term limits need to be addressed. So those are the three abuses that we see in our federal government. So what's our solution? Well, our solution is to hold a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution that would address those abuses. Article 5 of our Constitution describes two methods of whereby the Constitution can be amended. Let's briefly look at those two methods. The first method is whereby 2/3 of Congress propose an amendment or amendments, and those proposed amendments then have to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures, which would be 38 states. Once ratified, they become amendments to the Constitution. Well, there is a second method described in Article 5, and we're not making this up. This is actually in Article 5 of our Constitution. In Article 5, the second method is whereby 2/3 of the state legislatures apply to conduct a convention of states for the purpose of amending the Constitution. So at this convention, any proposed amendments that would come out of the convention then would have to go through the same ratification process as in the first method. So 3/4 of the state legislatures, or 38 states, would have to ratify any amendment or amendments before they would become amendments to the Constitution. Ratify any proposed amendments, I should say. Now, I might also mention 2/3 of the state legislatures, that's 34. 34 state legislatures have to apply to conduct this convention of states. Well, what's our plan? Our plan is basically into two parts. The first part is what we call the application strategy. As I just said, 34 states have to apply to hold the convention. Well, Convention of States has actually designed the application that we want these 34 states to utilize. And in that application, in the subject matter of the application, which determines the agenda at the convention, that subject matter addresses fiscal restraints, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and term limits. Those are the three areas that we mentioned in segment 1 when we had our discussion with Larry Wee. Fiscal restraints, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and term limits. So, second part of our plan is mobilizing the grassroots. And when I say mobilizing, when I say the grassroots, I'm talking about you, me, and our state legislators. Mobilizing the grassroots, growing that grassroots is very important to the structure of Convention of States. That's what's going to get this to happen. All right. So if you have any desire to get involved, we welcome your involvement. Go to that website, conventionofstates.com, sign the petition, open an account, and we'll be in touch with you. Now, just understand we're all across the country. We're in all 50 states now. As I mentioned earlier, in Indiana, we're over 30,000 supporters. Nationwide, we're over 3.9 million supporters. So we're growing quite a bit. The momentum is growing. 15 states have made application to hold this convention. And yes, Indiana is one of the 15 states. We were the 6th state to pass the application. It's also referred to as a resolution. So we were the 6th state to come on board. So we have 15, we got to get to 34. So we would welcome your involvement. All right, let's get back now to me. There I am. Okay, at this point, I want to kind of recognize the people that have been watching us this evening. And there's James Cressy. James has kind of become a regular on our broadcast. So welcome, James. Glad you could join us tonight. And I'm going to put what James says here. We the people. All right, that's right, James. We the people. Richard Loken. Richard's one of our. I started to say one of our district captains. Actually, Richard just recently was promoted to region captain. So Richard's been one of our a tremendous district captain for us, and so he did such a great job. We've made him a region captain. So thanks, Richard. Glad you could join us this evening. Another viewer, Sheila. I hope I'm saying this right. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Sheila or Chelly Bell. I'm sorry. I can't. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. But all of you, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I want to welcome you back. Hope you'll join us again. And let's just talk about our next broadcast. We're going to take Labor Day off, so no broadcast on September 2nd. So our next broadcast will be September 9th. And Paul is going to join me that evening, Paul Phillips. And I may get another person to join us that evening. We'll see how everything shakes out. But Convention of States just had a huge leadership summit and over this past weekend. And so Paul and possibly another guest is going to come on and kind of give us a summation and review of what happened, what went on at the summit. A lot of it, very, very interesting things happened. And I might mention Paul received a major award at that summit. So don't tell him about this, but we'll give him a little recognition on the broadcast. So look forward to that, and that'll be September 9th. All right. Okay, now I want to close out as I normally do with a quote from one of our founders, and that is Mark Meckler. And Mark's quote is that, there's a fundamental question facing our country today, and that question is not what we should do. The question is who will decide. And I think that is so appropriate. The question facing us is a two-word question, very simply, who decides? And as you might gather, we at Convention of States, we believe we the people should have a larger say-so in who decides. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Once again, no broadcast on September 2nd. Join us on then September 9th. Same time, Monday evening, 7 p.m. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good evening. Good night, everyone.